Hey, welcome to another edition of Storytime. Today is very interesting book. It's called As I Lay Dying by William Faulkner. Let me get it started here. I think this is the only Faulkner book that we have on the list, and I could have chosen a lot of them, but I chose this one. It's a very short book, but it's a fascinating book of how he writes it, and we'll get to that in a minute. I'm not sure if you know much about William Faulkner, but he's an incredible writer, and unfortunately, I don't know if I have any quotes to read from this book. He's born in Mississippi. He writes a lot about the South, and he writes the good and the bad about things in the South. He uses a lot of symbolism, as you'll see in this book. His masterpiece is said to be The Sound and the Fury, and he died in 1962. Considered one of the great writers in American history. You know, his name is up there with Steinbeck, Hemingway, Mark Twain, and maybe you can add some of the more recent ones to that as well. But there he is right there. Very humble man too. Nobel Prize for Literature, 1949, meaning he was the best writer in the world at that time. This book was written or published in 1930. So right at the beginning of the Great Depression. What's interesting about it is that each chapter is told from a different perspective of the character. So there's different ways of thinking. They have different dialogue. And so a lot of Faulkner is about like what's going on in people's heads. And so there's a lot of that going on. Here you can see how different characters think about the same situation. So it's fascinating. It tells the story of the Bundren family. And we start with learning that Addie Bundren, the mother of all the people that we're going to learn about, is dying. She hates her husband and has a favorite child that everybody knows, and that favorite child is Jewel. Anzi is the father. He is a hunchback farmer, very selfish. He's a bad father. He's hated and disrespected by his kids. He has horrible teeth. Darrell is the second child. He is the most sensitive and articulate of all of the Bundren children. Jewel is the third child, and he's very mysterious, and you'll see that throughout the course of the book. Brooding, passionate, always off to himself. Cash is the oldest, and he seems to be the most put together, stable. He's a skilled carpenter, very patient with everyone, selfless, giving of himself, even maybe to a fault. The fourth child is a girl, Dewey Dell. In the beginning of the book, she is 17 years old and is pregnant, and she has a suspicious view of almost all men that she meets. And the youngest child is just a kid. His name is Vardaman. He has a very lively imagination, very creative, as you'll see throughout the book. So as Addie's dying here, her son Cash is outside in the yard making a coffin for her. Jewel comes over, and Jewel again is the sensitive one, and he is upset that Cash is doing this, for everyone to see and hear. And he's mad not only at Cash, but he's mad at everyone else in the family who seems to be oblivious to what's really going on here. So while Cash is stable, he doesn't have a lot of the social skills to know maybe what's the right and wrong thing to do. Jewel really wants to be alone with its mom as she's dying, to say goodbye in whatever way she's going to do that, but he can never find a chance because everyone seems to be crowding her in her room and trying to be the person to be there when she dies. One of the neighbors, Tull, comes over, and Tull will come back into the story later, comes over to the house and says, I'll pay Jewel Darl some money if you come over and move some stuff for me. It's too heavy for me. So they go do it, but Ans is worried that they won't be back before Addie dies. But he doesn't do anything about it. He just thinks about this. And so this is going to be one of the themes throughout the book, is like, what's the difference between thinking and doing and action? And does it even matter that you think about something if your actions don't follow that? Jewel and Darl go and do this job. Tull's trying to be like a good neighbor and is like, don't worry about your mom, we've been all there. And Jewel gets mad at him, and he says, mind your own business. And again, it's this thing that Jewel is very passionate, very excitable, but he doesn't really want anybody else around. He's very lonely. I wouldn't say lonely, but very distant from everybody else. Ans, the father, says he's proud of the family. He is proud the family will fulfill Addie's final wish of being buried in Jefferson, which is a few towns over. So that's going to be most of the book, is this journey with Addie's dead body. Cora is Tull's wife. Again, Cora and Tull are nice people, but they're watching the whole thing, and they're disgusted by what they interpret as Jewel's callousness towards the whole thing, even though Jewel's probably the most passionate one, and Darl, who is not intelligent enough maybe to be able to explain how he wants to say goodbye to his mom. He says his heart is too full of her words. There's something quite clear early on, is that none of these stories are interacting with each other. And so each of these family members are so isolated from each other that their stories don't really interact. And so that kind of tells you a little bit something about the dysfunction of this family. If you remember, Darl and Jewel are out doing this job, and yeah. And let's see, Vardaman arrives with a fish he caught. Vardaman is the youngest kid. Might be something wrong with Vardaman, but Vardaman arrives with the fish he caught, and Ans, the father, pays no compliment or anything and just yells at him to clean the fish first. And Ans, then the father, stares at his wife, Addie, as she's dying. Instead of thinking about all of those things, he thinks about the bad weather, his sons, how bad his life is, how there's too much traffic on the road. He thinks that someone put the road there to bother him on purpose. He blames Addie's poor health on the road. So again, he's coming up with all these excuses for the poor conditions in which they live. Meanwhile, Vardaman is cleaning the fish, and he returns covered in blood from cleaning the fish, obviously cleaning it wrong. And Ans realizes that he doesn't really think about anything. He's not really a deep thinker, and he says it must be because it's too hot. Dr. Peabody finally arrives. Ans did request the doctor to come, but the doctor's like, why didn't you call me sooner? It's too late now. All the while, Cash is still sawing and building the coffin in the back. Darl somehow knows what is going on back home and can actually describe Eddie's death, even though he's not there. And so it becomes clear from that perspective that Darl is the most clear and competent speaker to the truth of what's really going on at this time. But as Eddie dies, Vardaman and Ann's come in, and they just sit there silent, and you think they don't talk to the woman who's dying in front of them. Cash comes in. Anne says, "You better finish the coffin fast." And he strokes and touches Addie's face, but kind of awkwardly. And then she dies. And Anne thinks, boy, this is rotten luck. God's will be done. But then he says, now I can get them teeth. And so really what's motivating Anne's in this whole process is, sure, he's going to be able to take Addie to get buried in Jefferson like she wanted, but he can also get the new teeth that he has always wanted to get there. Darrell turns to Jewel. If you remember, they're off someplace else at Tull's, and Darrell turns to Jewel and tells him that his mom has passed away. Vardaman runs out of the house crying, and he sees the blood and he sees the parts of the fish, and he has trouble figuring out what's real and what's not real. So he calls this not fish and not blood, or he blames the doctor for his mom's death. And he goes into the barn and whips the horse of the doctor's horse, trying to find a way to explain what's going on. Cash continues to build the coffin, and that's good enough there. Vardaman runs to the coffin, he stares. Okay, so they put the mom, no, not yet. They haven't put the mom in the coffin, but Vardaman runs to the coffin being built and is like upset that he knows his mom is going to be put into the coffin and nailed inside. And doesn't like that. Tull, again, being the neighbor that he is, he hears about this, comes and helps Cash finish the coffin. They finally place Addie in the coffin, and then they nail it shut. But they put her in upside down. First of all, Cash is very proud of the coffin that he made. He says it's like perfectly balanced, but it's shaped like on an angle. Let's see if I can. It's like a drive. So it's shaped like this. Like, you might think a coffin back in the day might be built, but because of the dress that they put Addie in, they decide to put her in upside down so her dress doesn't get wrinkled. And Cash is like, you don't want to do that because it's going to make everything unbalanced. Yes. Later that night, Vardaman comes and is still upset that his mom is in the coffin and can't breathe and is drilled. So he drills holes into the coffin and doesn't know that he's drilling into her face. This story gets worse. It does get worse. Darrell begins to wonder about things, like he wonder if he is or is not. He doesn't know, like, how an animate person, human being like her mom can now just be an object in a box. Yes. Okay. So they load the coffin up into the wagon. They know it's been raining really hard in the area, so they know it's going to be hard to get out of the area in which they live because of the rivers they have to cross. Before they leave, Cash wants to fix a church, do a job that he told that he would, but he falls off and he hurts his leg. They do fill up the holes in the coffin that Vardaman drilled. Let's see. Jewel has a special relationship with his horse, and we'll talk about that in a little bit later. But it's clear here near the middle of the book that there is this special relationship. Finally, they're going to leave with the body. Cash is trying to explain why the coffin is not balanced. Remember, he built it perfectly, he thought, and he's so obsessed by the balance and how it was built. And now that she's upside down in the coffin, it's not going to be balanced. As they're loading the coffin into the wagon, it begins to fall. Cash tries to save it, but he can't because of his hurt leg. Ans and Darl let go, and Jewel is this person who single-handedly puts the cart back into the coffin, back into the cart, all while cursing out the family that he hates. Let's see. Cash is so they load up the cart with other things. Cash brings his tools. Dewey Dell brings some cakes that she's supposed to deliver along the way. Jewel goes to the barn to get his horse. They leave without him, assuming that he's going to catch up. Let's see. Jewel's trying to avoid the interaction with the family. Daryl's trying to, he's trying to fix in his head why someone can just be gone that quickly, like his mom has been gone. Cash is still stuck to the physicality of things, whether it be the coffin or now the smell that is starting to occur with the dead body. Ans continues to be self-absorbed about himself, thinking about his new teeth that he's about to get and how unfair life has been to him. So they come to one of the rivers that they have to cross, and they can't. It's too swollen. So they stop and they stay at the Sampson farm. Mrs. Sampson is outraged by what's going on and how the dead body of Addie is decomposing in the casket. But still, they continue on. They try to find a different way. They pass Tull's house again. Remember, Tull and Cora are the ones who've helped them. And Tull comes out and says, "Look, there's the bridge has been washed out. You can't really cross this river." Dewey Dell, who has this consistent uneasiness around men, thinks that Tull has tried to touch her in bad places. Darl just sits there and stares at him. Cash, is thinking about how Tull's also a skilled carpenter, and Jewel just glares at him with eyes like pieces of broken glass, the book says. And again, it's mind your own business. But Cash tells Jewel to shut up because they have to find a way to cross. They ask Tull if they can use his mule to help cross the river, and he says, "No way." Jewel yells at him again, because Jewel's confused. And they offer to buy the mule right on the spot, but Tull refuses. Darl knows and has seen this glare from Jewel before. Back when they were a kid, Jewel really wanted this horse and would leave at night and work all night at someone else's farm and get paid extra money so he could buy this horse. And he finally brought it. Him and his mom had some understanding of how hard he worked and what kind of a special person Jewel was. So they're going to try to cross this river. Oh, and what a scene. It's Ans, Dewey, Dell, and Vardaman and Tull go upstream to try to find a shallow place to cross. Jewel, Cash, Darl argue about how to cross this river. And if you've ever done like a job, like built something with your family, you might know how maybe these conversations might go. Jewel, Cash, and Darl are all arguing how to cross. But they all agree, since Cash is the most stable one, he's going to be the one who kind of drives the wagon across the river. Darl will be in the wagon, making sure everything is safe, while Jewel's going to be on his horse with a support rope, trying to help things out. So that's the plan that they come up with. So they enter the river, and so the river is very symbolic as well. You know, you can think about this in religious terms, that those who are crossing over back in religious or mythological days or whatever, those crossing the river of Styx, crossing from the world of life to the world of death. This could be this moment right here. And I'm not sure what I'm about to tell you is funny or is tragic. It's weird. Maybe this is how great the book is written. Sometimes I'll read this section and it'll be like the most tragic thing I've ever read. Other times I will be laughing out loud while I'm reading it. So I'm not sure how you want to take what's about to happen to these people. But let's just talk about it. So they enter the river with the wagon, and a log comes rushing down, and it hits the wagon, and it hits it hard. And so things are starting to teeter, they don't know what's supposed to happen. Cash yells at Darl to jump out of the wagon because it's unbalanced. Again, back to this concept of balancing. The wagon spills over with Jewel still holding on with his rope. Cash is still on top of the wagon, but it's falling into the river. But things start to spill out into the river, like Cash's tools. And if you remember how much pride Cash has in the work that he does, you should know like how important these tools are to him. But they go spilling out into the river. And what else goes spilling out into the river but the coffin? Also, in front of the wagon, the mules who are pulling it drowned and die, and they go floating by. And Ans, Vardaman, Dewey, Dell, and Tull are downriver, and they see all these things floating down. Cash reaches out to try to grab the coffin, and he touches it, but he loses its grip as the river takes it away. Vardaman, the young boy, is running down the river, yelling to get the coffin, yelling at someone to get the coffin. Tull won't jump in. He won't go in and save the coffin or anything else, but he does wade a few feet into the river to grab Darl and pulls Darl out. Darl tries to reach out and grab the coffin too, and he does touch it and grab it, but it begins to sink. He goes down under the water with the coffin. We think he's going to save it, but he comes up empty-handed. Vardaman runs downstream. He's still running, screaming, "Save the coffin! Save the coffin!" Tull, the same person from the outside, is yelling at Ans for the whole situation, but Ans has done nothing. The father's done nothing. He was like, "Oh, if the bridge was up, this wouldn't be a problem." And again, this is idea that Ans is living in a world in his head, and he'll never do anything to fix the situation that's going on in reality. And Jewel, again, much like he did earlier, he does it again. He's the one who single-handedly, with this rope and stuff, pulls the coffin and the wagon to shore. Jewel is the only one also who goes back in the river. He's diving under the water to try to find Cash's tools. And if you remember, Cash is still suffering from a hurt leg. He's done nothing to do anything about his leg. So all this time he's been doing all this with a broken leg, but nobody really knows that it's a broken leg. So they bring all the things onto the shore, and they got the wagon on shore, they got the coffin on shore, they got most of Cash's tools, and at least Jewel's done all of this. And the one thing that Cash says is that this wouldn't have happened if the coffin was balanced. So now in the middle of the book, it's weird, or like the last third of the book, Addie has a chapter. We haven't heard from the mother here, but because she's dead, right? And so we have her story here, and she recounts how her and Ann's got married, and how matter of fact it was. It was like, hey, let's get married, okay. That Darrell and Cash's birth helped her with her aloneness and her loneliness, even though at times she wanted to be alone. She could never be alone again with Darrell and Cash's um, birth. She reveals that she had an affair with the Reverend Whitfield, and was confused that moral people like him, who are supposed to be like totally moral and ethical, can still sin. And that the last two kids, Dewey Dell and Vardaman, were there to pay this debt that she felt she had to Ann's, and after that she could die and get rid of this horrible life that she has. And there's a flashback to Reverend Whitfield, who that day he was going to the Budrums to confess his guilt before Addie died, because he felt so guilty about this affair that he had. But when he gets there, it's too late. And instead of telling the truth to everyone, he pays his last respects and leaves. Now we think that, and maybe you know this by now, but it looks like Jewel is the son of Whitfield and Addie, and not the son of Ann's, which might explain some things. So they're off onto the dry land now. They got everything. Jewel rides ahead to try to find some horses so they can get the wagon moving. Cash is semi-conscious, broken leg, exhausted, and he gets placed. Dara places him on the coffin, and so this might be symbolic as well about what's happening to Cash. Somehow they borrow the horses from the Amisteds. They get to the Amistad house. They pull everything there. They stay the night in the shed. Jewel does not stay with the family. He stays with the horses. He'd rather stay with the horses than with his family. Amistad Ann's wants to get some new mules. Amistad says, you can buy mine. Ann's declines. Jewel rides out for Dr. Peabody again and finds a horse doctor instead. And they bring the horse doctor to look at Cash, and they say Cash has a broken leg, and Cash is in so much pain. But he never says a word about his pain. He just grins and bears, I guess. By now, there are buzzards following this wagon because of how bad it smells. And even though Ann's could have gotten a team of mules from the Amisteds, he just goes out and gets his own new team, and he said he got it because he mortgaged the farm equipment. He took some money that Cash had. He took some money from his new teeth fund, and he traded in Jewel's horse. This is a horse that Jewel worked for years on his own at night to buy. That seems to be, he'd rather spend time with his horse than with his family. And when Jewel hears that he's sold off his horse, he hops on the horse and he rides off. So the next morning they think there's no way they're going to get the horses because Jewel's horse isn't part of the deal. But soon enough, the owners of the mules arrive and they say, here are your new mules. And they say, well, we didn't think it was going to happen because without Jewel's horse. And he said, oh no, the horse was there. It was left outside our house. So Jewel's given up his horse for this fiasco that's still continuing. Dewey Dell goes to his shop. She meets someone named Mosley, and she says to Mosley that she really wants to get an abortion. He refuses. She insists, and she says, "I'll give you $10." He still refuses. But he's going to try to give it to her a little bit later on. The doctor who's looking at Cash, the animal doctor, the veterinarian, says he has a broken leg and you have to put it in a cast. They don't have like paste and things for a cast, so they buy cement. and they set Cash's broken leg in cement. They wrap it in cement. It's been 8 days now. The corpse is 8 days old, been rotting in the summer humidity, but they keep moving on, heading to Jefferson. Let's see. That night, so they stop at a farm that night, and Darrell begins to fall apart. Darrell and Bartleman go out to the coffin, and Darrell says he can hear Addie talking, but obviously he can't. And Darrell, we find out, is really the most emotionally scarred person here. He has trouble dealing with the emotional things, and now he begins to act irrationally, as you'll see here in a minute. They move Addie into the barn that they're staying at because there are so many buzzards and the smell and all that. And Darrell thinks that the only way to end this whole fiasco is to burn the barn down with the body inside. And so he tries to do this, and burns the house down, burns the barn down. Jewel, once again, is the one who runs into the barn to save the coffin. They look at Cash, and Cash, maybe the stench isn't coming from the coffin, it's coming from Cash's leg because it's turned black because of the cement that's, just ruining his leg. They try to break the cement off, but that's just as painful as the broken leg. Darrell, who understands the fiasco that's going on, goes back to the coffin, lies on top of the coffin, and weeps and cries because he doesn't seem like there's an end to this horrific scene that's happening. They finally get to the town of Jefferson with the coffin in the wagon. Cash is laying on top of the coffin. And it's at this time that Ans realizes that maybe Cash should go see a doctor. They pass the strangers along the street who comment on how horrible the things smell. Jewel yells at them, mind your own business. We find out that Darrell has been sent to is going to be sent to a mental hospital because he burned down the barn, and the only way that the people who own the barn wouldn't prosecute the family is if they bought the idea that Darrell had gone crazy. And so they, I don't know if it's here, yeah. So they send Darrell off to the mental institution. They find a house. They just stop at a house to get a shovel so they can bury Addie. And a gramophone is playing inside a record player. Cash says that he was saving his money to buy one of those. And stays in the house longer than normal, but he comes out with 2 shovels. They finally bury Addie in the cemetery. 2 men show up and take Darrell away. He resists violently, but his family calm him down to make him go. And I just can't imagine this when everybody knows that maybe he's not the crazy one. And they just let these people take Darrell away, and his family especially lets him be taken away. Dr. Peabody arrives to set Cash's leg. He says Cash will probably never walk again. At least not walk normally. He yells at Ans for being a horrible human being by setting the leg in concrete, for being a bad father, all of these things. So here Dewey Dell goes and finds another clerk and says he wants an abortion. She wants an abortion for $10. This is the clerk who pretends he's a doctor, though he's not, and he says he'll do it for $10. And he gives her something to drink and tells her to come back that night when he'll give her an abortion. Vardaman comes back that night. She goes inside and comes back out a little bit later and says it will never work. It will never work. It will never work. It will never work. And so she doesn't get the abortion, or so something goes wrong. She lets Anne's know that she has $10. She says she's got it from selling the cakes that she brought along. Anne says he'd like to borrow the money. And she says, if you do, you'll be a thief. Cash remembers that Anne was going to go back to the house to return the shovels and had been there a long time. But the next morning, as the family's ready to leave Jefferson, Anne says he'll meet up with them down the road a little bit. And he finally does, with a new set of false teeth, escorting a woman who he introduces as the new Mrs. Budren. And they have a gramophone. The end. And so I want you to things to think about in this book. Is this a tragedy or a comedy? I wonder if you can tell who is the most heroic or who's the most unheroic person in this book. About this fourth question, should some people fail? Like, is there something about these horrible human beings that they shouldn't be successful? What about identity? How do you become who you want to be? How do you become who you are? And how does the family impact you? Is it difficult to get out of a family that maybe is holding you back? Or is there such a thing as a family holding you up? And then there's this question about action versus thought. What's more important to be successful? Should you be action-oriented? Or should you be thoughtful? Are most of the failures in your life or in our world due to people who don't think very well or who don't act as much, or maybe a combination of the two? And can anything that you can take from this that maybe you can apply to the world in which we live? I think there is, and this is why this book has lasted around so long. If you want, there's a movie version of this that James Franco made. It's pretty good. If you like the book, some people who maybe had never read the book or understood what the story was about didn't really like the movie, but he does a pretty good job of capturing all the different people. And I think it's very well done, and it looks fantastic. And there's some of the split screens and things as different characters are thinking different ways. So if you think about it, go ahead and check that out on Netflix or Amazon or whatever. They're available. It's not that old of a movie. It might help you visualize the story a little bit. But that's it for now. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.